at the Good News store in town because I wanted to grab the CDs that had the songs that we sang in church. So I'd buy the Hillsong albums and Brownsville Revival albums and Delirious CDs. And I loved this newfound genre of music called praise and worship. It's pretty cool. And I wanted to play it over and over again in my little Sanyo CD player home with the headphones on in my bedroom. And for me at that time, the terms praise and worship referred to the songs that we sang in church. Praise was those first two upbeat songs at the beginning of the service. And then the worship was those three slower ballads which drew people to tears and people had their hands raised to the ceiling. But is that what worship is? Is it a genre of music? A slot in our Sunday morning service before 30 minutes of notices, 45 minutes of a sermon followed by a cup of instant coffee and a super wine biscuit in the foyer? Is worship singing? Is worship raising your hands and getting emotional over the lyrics? Is worship dancing? Is worship just a feeling of warmth that you get when you sing to Jesus? What if you can't sing or dance or play an instrument? Does that mean that you can't worship? We sing in church for approximately 30 minutes each week. Does that mean that the other 10,050 minutes each week are not considered worship unless you're singing? Let's investigate it this morning then, hey? Where in the Bible is the first mention of worship? Do you feel comfortable today? A soft padded seat. It's not too hot, it's not too cold. There are no wild animals that might bite you and eat you. This here is a picture of the Negev mountains in Israel. It is the wilderness of the Middle East. You can't tell by this photo, but the temperature is a balmy 37 degrees, and tonight it'll drop to 9. There's been very little rainfall, and the possibility of the following animals live there: foxes, ostriches, some people are scared of birds, leopards, wolves, rats, bats, and large cats, locusts, scorpions, spiders, and snakes. The desert also attracts many thieves, murderers, and gangs. Anyone want to visit this place today and have church? This is the place where worship is first mentioned in the Bible. It is not a place of comfort. It is not a place of peace. It is the wilderness. And Abraham and his family, they live there. My first point here today is that worship is an offering or a response. Abraham and his family are living in the wilderness, not just visiting for a few hours. They live there. It is not a place of comfort or peace. And we're going to read Genesis chapter 22, where it's first mentioned in the Bible. It is a setting and a circumstance that is not comfortable to read. It actually reads like a horror novel. So if we had some really cool music in behind here that would set that scene, imagine the Jaws music. Let's read. Genesis chapter 22, verses 1 to 13. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. That's going to test your theology today. God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham, here I am." He replied. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son who you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on the mountain I will show you." Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you." Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. And the two of them went together. Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, "Father?" "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. The wood, the fire, the wood are here," Isaac said, "but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the two of them went on together. And when they reached the place that God had told them about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. This is when Jaws music comes in. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. He reached out his hand. He took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham, here I am," he replied. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," he said. "Do not do anything to him. Now that I know you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide." And to this day it is said, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided." Worship is a response to God's call. We see this where God calls out first, "Abraham, Abraham." He replies, "Here I am." It's even repeated with Jesus. "Here I am." Are you listening to God? Do you hear his voice? And what is your response? Worship involves hearing God's voice in the midst of life's distractions and responding with a willing heart. Abraham's obedience, even when asked to sacrifice his son Isaac, exemplifies worship as a recognition of God's sovereignty and power. Worship isn't just about rituals or songs, but a surrender of our desires and plans. That trusting God is always good, even when it challenges us and our understanding. It's an act of reverence that acknowledges God's rightful place in our lives and calls us to respond without delay or hesitation. "Here I am," just as Abraham did. The offering that Abraham made was not physical. It was his heart and his obedience. Worship is not about external sacrifices, but offering our hearts to God in trust and surrender. When Abraham was willing to sacrifice Isaac, he demonstrated that his faith in God's promises was stronger than his attachment to his son. Worship is about offering ourselves, our lives, our trust, our obedience as a sacrifice to God. It calls for immediate, unwavering obedience, and it is an acknowledgement that God deserves our worship today without delay. Brooke Ligertwood, one of the great hymn writers of today, you might know her better as Brooke Fraser, recently put up a video on her Instagram. And she says this: "Worship is not a show, and worship is not Christian entertainment. Worship is not even primarily for people. It is holy, WHOLLY, holy for God. It is an offering for God to consume, not for us to consume. It is an offering, and to be called worship, it must cost the giver to give it." Abraham's worship was an offering that cost him profoundly. He was willing to kill his only son. Psalm 100 verse 4 says, enter his gates with thanksgiving and enter his courts with praise. Be thankful to him and bless his name so that you'll be blessed in your business and he'll heal you and you'll meet all your needs and you'll feel all warm and fuzzy when you leave. No. Enter his gates with thanksgiving, his courts with praise. Full stop. Those other things are byproducts to the fact that God loves us. But worship should never have an agenda attached to it. My next point is that worship is intimate and corporate. That worship, that the offering that Abraham brought was intimate. It was between him and God. But not all worship in the word is between one person and God. Sometimes it is corporate. And in Psalm 95 verse 6, if you know this song from back in the 80s, would you sing it with me? It's on the next slide. Psalm 95 verse 6. Ready? Come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our God, our Maker. For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture, paraphrase, and the sheep of his hand, just the sheep of his hand. Good singing. This first word, come, it is an invitation. And it speaks of this aspect of community. It suggests movement, like a pilgrimage. Come, come. Worship is an invitation into God's presence with reverence and humility, but it is a communal act at times that unites believers in acknowledging God's greatness. The next part, let us worship and bow down. Worship and bowing down indicates a posture of humility and reverence. It is a phrase that emphasizes the attitude of our heart to bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker, kneeling, a physical act of submission and devotion. It is more than just an emotional or internal response. Our actions, the way in which we express our worship, should reflect our heart's posture of humility and reverence. Which leads me to this next point, that worship requires action and obedience. Luke 7:36-50. One of the Pharisees asked Jesus to eat with him, so Jesus went to the Pharisee's house and sat at the table. A sinful woman in the town learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house. So she brought an alabaster jar of perfume and stood behind Jesus at his feet, crying. She began to wash his feet with her tears, and she dried them with her hair, kissing them many times and rubbing them with perfume. Would anyone like to reenact this moment? Back in Jesus' day, he did not wear covered shoes. There was no asphalt. It was dirt, and plumbing, particularly when it came to that stuff, was not well established. This would have been seen as a very disgusting thing to do. Would anyone like to kiss Glenn's feet today? Rub in some oils. This woman worships Jesus with profound humility and love, tenderly washing his feet with her weeping tears, wiping them gently with her long, flowing hair, and anointing them with very costly, fragrant perfume. This kind of worship is called proskuneo. Now, we all know that the Bible is not written in English, yeah? Is that a revelation to anybody today? It's written in the New Testament in Greek, and this is a Greek word, proskuneo. I've actually put the Greek underneath there for those who speak Greek. It means to bow down. Can I show it to you? Sorry. This way, better? Or straight on the floor. Kissing hands or feet, like a dog to its master. It is described in worship of God, specifically in Matthew 4:10, where Jesus says to Satan, "For it is written, you shall proskuneo the Lord our God, and him only you shall serve." In John 4:21-24, where Jesus is talking to the Samaritan woman at the well, my Greek's not very good. "Yet a time is coming and has now come when true proskunioers will proskuneo the Father in spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of proskunioers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his proskunioers must proskuneo in spirit and in truth." You hear this comment sometimes, the worship was great today. Sometimes you hear, worship wasn't that great today. What do we mean? What do we mean by that? Were there lots of people kissing feet? Were there lots of people on the floor with tears in their eyes, washing the floor with their hands, or with their hair? The scripture mentions the following people who proskunioed Jesus. Not that one, go back. That's my dog, we'll get to that soon. The wise men from the east in the nativity, proskuneo. The leper who bows at Jesus' feet, who is cleansed, proskuneo. The synagogue leader whose daughter has just died, Jairus. The Canaanite woman with a demon-possessed daughter. The blind man who was born blind and healed by Jesus and puts mud in his eyes. Even his disciples proskuneo him. On the boat when Jesus walks on water, some of them proskuneo. When he appears to his disciples after his resurrection, some of them proskuneo. Now you can put up the picture of my black Labrador. This is Henry. Every time I come home, no matter how long I've been gone, whether it's a few hours or a few days, it's like he's been waiting for years. He gets so excited, he dances around in circles, his tail going like a helicopter. And then he's not like other dogs that jump and bark. He's far more biblical. He sits down, he looks up at me with those big soulful eyes, and he licks my hand. At first I thought that was just, that's just Henry, but I looked into proskuneo, which means to bow down and to worship and to lick the hand or to kiss the hand of your king. And I thought, Henry's actions aren't that different when he bows down and he sits quietly in front of me and he licks my hand. In his own way, Henry is showing respect and affection just like the biblical term calls for, a place of honor and humility. So every time now that he greets me, I think, wow, this guy's a naturally born worship leader. If we could all have the same eager heart to serve and honor God with the same excitement and devotion. If we can learn anything from Henry, it's that sometimes worship doesn't need to be grand or complicated. It's just showing up and loving the one you love. Of course, it wouldn't be a complete Henry greeting with a few occasional accidents. Sometimes in his excitement, he will pee on the floor. So maybe don't take that lesson from him when it comes to worship. But when you're excited to worship, you should be so full of joy that even if you make a mess, it will be an offering to God. The Japanese, in their culture, the depth and length of the bow has a symbol of respect. It's very close to this word proskuneo. The depth of one's respect in worship represents the posture of reverence, surrender, and submission before God. It's more than the external gesture, but a deep, heartfelt acknowledgement of the one that you bow to. When we consider how long should I stay? And how deep should I stay? How far should I go when I bow to God? It is not a momentary physical gesture, but a lifetime of total surrender to God. Romans 12 verse 1 says, "Therefore, in view of God's mercy, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God, for that is true proskuneo." It is not just a physical, literal lying down for the rest of your life, because that's not practical. Okay? You can't, that's it. You're just on the floor for the rest of your life, yeah? But it is about what has happened here. I lay it all down for the rest of my life. The other word that sometimes is translated to worship is latruo. Latruo. Worship is not just about singing and lifting hands. It is about living our devotion through service. The Greek word latruo is often translated as worship in the New Testament, but its deeper meaning is tied to serving. Latruo means to serve or to minister to, and conveys the idea of devotion expressed through actions. Like in Romans 12, verse 1, that Paul is saying, not just to use our words and to sing, but our actions as an offering and service to God. One of the clearest examples of latruo being used to describe worship through service is found in Luke 10:25-37, the parable of the Good Samaritan. In this story, Jesus challenges the notion of worship by showing that loving our neighbor through service is an expression of our love for God. The Samaritan serves the injured man without hesitation, again, going above and beyond to ensure his well-being. In fact, the Samaritan gives the innkeeper 24 times more than what is necessary. His actions demonstrate that worship is not confined to a place or a time, but can be lived out in your everyday decisions and acts of kindness. Jesus himself exemplified latruo in his ministry. In Mark 10:45, he says, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." Jesus' life was one of sacrificial service. He didn't wait for others to serve him. He served others and he transformed lives. In serving others, we serve God. Every act of kindness, every moment spent helping others is an offering of worship. Worship flows from your heart, a heart that says, I want to serve God by serving his creation. Latruo teaches us that worship goes beyond the sanctuary, and it is lived out in our every act of service to those around us. At worship, I feel like today, this little illustration was me. Sometimes some of the prophets in the Old Testament didn't say anything. It's just they lived out their life A worship leader who loved to use, and this I'll say her because this is the example, a worship leader who loved to use her gift by singing to God and leading the church in worship wasn't able to in a large church conference because she had little children and her husband was serving in another capacity. She was immensely disappointed that she wasn't able to do what she's gifted to do, which is to lead people in song. So she is sitting where you're sitting in the congregation feeling disappointed that she's unable to operate in her gift, so she does what she always does when she's not rostered on. She raises her hands to heaven. And she says, quoting a book called Hind's Feet on High Places, "Here I am, your handmaiden, your servant. What would you have me do?" And God spoke to her in that moment and said, "I want you to be a mum." In that moment, she realized that her act of worship was not singing songs, but serving her children for the glory of God. Can I have the worship team, please? Can we go to the next slide, please? Serving in rock stars, superstars, Ignition, Flame, in Marfell, or the tea and coffee after church, or vacuuming the church, vacuuming the auditorium during the week, if it is done with the right heart, is worship. If we truly call ourselves Christians and followers of Jesus, then serving should be the natural expression of worship. Jesus, our ultimate example, came not to be served, but to serve. His life demonstrated that worship isn't just about what we sing or say. It is about how we live, specifically through serving others. The church shouldn't struggle to find volunteers to serve. The church shouldn't find it hard to find volunteers to serve in ministries if we are truly living out our worship. Mark 12:30 says this: "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. There is no greater commandment than these." Jesus, mic drop. In serving God and serving others, and it's worship. It should naturally flow in our everyday lives. Worship isn't limited to Sunday services and singing. It extends to how we treat and engage with others, particularly the needy and the vulnerable. Serving others is a powerful expression of our worship for God. Community groups and volunteer organizations should be filled with Christians. Can I say that again? Community groups and volunteer organizations should be filled with Christians if they have the same values as ours. Because our worship isn't about gathering together and singing. It is how we outlive our faith. It is how we serve God by loving our neighbors as ourselves. If we truly love worshiping God, we should seek out opportunities to serve those around us, whether in the church or beyond. When we serve, we're worshiping God, following his command to love others. This kind of worship, rooted in action, spills out into every part of our lives. Serving isn't just about what we give. It is a powerful way we show our devotion to God and make a real impact in this world. James 1:27 says, "Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world." Amos 5:21. This is God speaking to us, not me. So don't come and just take it up with him. He says this is the Message paraphrase. I can't stand your religious meetings. I'm fed up with your conferences and conventions. I want nothing to do with your projects, your pretentious slogans and goals. I'm sick of your fundraising schemes, your public relations and image making. I've had all I can take with your noisy ego music. When was the last time you sang to me? Do you know what I want? I want justice, oceans of it. I want fairness, rivers of it. That's what I want. That's all I want. As we've seen today, worship is not just about songs and singing, or the hands we lift, or the emotions we feel. It's about our heart's posture in humility, reverence, and service to God. Worship in its truest form involves bowing down in awe, proskuneo, and offering ourselves in service, latruo, to others. It's a complete surrender of who we are and a response to God's great love and sacrifice for us. In the same way, when we sing, we are not just expressing our emotions or singing beautiful lyrics. We are offering ourselves in worship to God, like Abraham, saying, "Here I am. Lord, here I am, ready to serve. Here I am, ready to bow down. You are King." I'm going to sing a song called "Here I Am to Worship." It is a powerful declaration of that heart posture, a response to God's call to us. Here I am. Perhaps you would love to come and proskuneo in this place and lay it all down and say to God, "Here I am. Here I am to worship." And when we go from this place of worship, go and worship. Worship doesn't stop. At the end of this service, it's not like we leave the worship here and we go off and we just do what we want. We worship proskuneo and we worship latruo. Let's sing, and if you want to come and proskuneo before him, and that opportunity is for you in this moment.